A month after the Trump administration changed how COVID-19 data gathered by hospitals is reported, the release of that data has slowed to a crawl, according to the Wall Street Journal. Testing and test results in the U.S. lag behind other developed nations. All this as the U.S. reported the most coronavirus-related deaths in one day since May. After weeks of pushing for schools to reopen, the White House is only now offering to supply millions of masks. Tens of millions of Americans whose benefits ran out weeks ago remain casualties of Washington gridlock. Democrats, Republicans, and the White House all say there are no plans to even come to the table in the coming days. The virus continues to spread at high rates across the Midwest, West, and Southern U.S. President Trump held a photo op in the Oval Office today, heralding a major diplomatic achievement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. He also continues to lash out at political opponents and undermine the credibility of mail-in voting. A short time after a top CDC official said this autumn could be the worst on record from a public health perspective, Joe Biden made a public plea.
Every single American should be wearing a mask when they're outside for the next 3 months at a minimum. Every governor should mandate mandatory mask wearing. Be a patriot. Protect your fellow citizens. Protect your fellow citizens. Step up. Do the right thing. Do the right thing.
For more on this, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tamara Keith. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Tamara is a White House correspondent for NPR and host of the NPR Politics podcast. Welcome to you both. Caitlin, let me start with you. This is now the second joint appearance from the Biden-Harris ticket. What did we hear from them? What are we learning about their message?
Well, Elaine, campaigns are usually a test of hypotheticals. What would you do in a pandemic? What would you do in an economic crisis? But during this time, these two candidates, Biden and Harris, are getting a real-time test for commander-in-chief and potential vice president. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have a huge financial crisis. If they were elected, they would inherit both of these things. And so what they are trying to do with their joint appearance today is kind of show what their version of governing would look like and be like. So they heard from health officials today. They got a briefing. Biden has said that several times a week he is getting a briefing by health officials. So they were trying to kind of show how they would operate if they were in charge. You mentioned at the top that he advocated for wearing masks for the next 3 months and said that they would mandate that over the next 3 months, urging governors to start doing that now. They did not take questions from the press. We're hoping that they will do so at further events. But this was a way for the campaign to show a united front and to kind of show how they would govern in times like this.
Tamara, let me turn to you and ask about these economic relief talks. I mean, it's now been 2 weeks since those benefits stopped for millions of Americans. Is there any hope here for those stalled negotiations?
Yeah, talks might be a generous word to describe what's going on at this point. You know, the president over the weekend signed those executive actions. The White House has been pretty plain about the fact that it would be much better if they could get a deal with Congress in terms of actually getting things done. But the president has those executive actions to point to say that he's done something, and it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of interest in truly making a deal at this point. And President Trump on Fox Business this morning was, and he did it yesterday in his briefing as well, was complaining about what Democrats wanted, complaining that Democrats wanted too much money for the Postal Service. And he kind of said the quiet part out loud, saying that if the Postal Service doesn't get that money, then how would it be possible for them to do universal vote by mail, which is something that he opposes.
Right. A lot of people raising their eyebrows after that statement. Caitlin, I want to ask you about this poll out today from Monmouth University, which found most Americans think that the U.S. handling of the pandemic is worse than other countries. and 53% of Americans do not approve of the president. What does that say as we get closer here to the presidential election?
Well, we've seen in our own CBS News battleground tracking poll in key battleground states that the president's low approval when it comes to the coronavirus is really fueling support for Joe Biden. For example, over the weekend, we saw a poll in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, voters disapproving of the way things are going right now, and those voters supporting Biden for president. And what was really interesting to me in that survey is that Donald Trump still continues to have an edge over Biden when it comes to the economy. It seems like voters are willing to give the president the benefit of the doubt, kind of supporting this argument that the White House and the reelection campaign have been making, which was that the economy was booming before the pandemic. So voters are still giving positive grades to the president on the economy, even as it putters out. But interestingly enough, that's not enough to boost support for him overall. Instead, voters are saying that the handling of the coronavirus pandemic is bigger than anything else, is tied to the economy, of course, and he's getting poor grades for that, and that's helping to fuel the support of his opponent, at least at this stage in the race.
Tamara, let me ask you about what we saw at the White House today, an event in which President Trump made a number of claims about the Middle East, also about defeating ISIS. Can you give us just a bit of a fact check here? Break down some of these claims for us, because there are a lot of folks who will only hear his part of that message and not understand the broader context here.
So the White House has really rolled out this agreement. It's sort of an agreement to begin working on a formal agreement between the UAE and Israel. And certainly it is a moment, it is a milestone, but you had the National Security Advisor saying that maybe President Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize. They are definitely boosting this beyond what it actually is. The White House is also saying that they would like to announce more deals between Israel and Arab nations as time goes on. It's not clear how that would happen or when. And as you say, the president says that he fully defeated ISIS. That's not true. ISIS is still around. President Trump has a tendency to overinflate his accomplishments.
And just to be clear, so it sounds like you're saying if it's an agreement, to have an agreement, it's a very preliminary kind of point in this process. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there are talks that are still necessary to happen to actually have the agreement and have something to sign on the dotted line. But this is the beginning of a conversation between two nations that have had, they don't have normalized relations, certainly, but they do have, a relationship. They have been having some interactions. This would formalize something more, but they have to negotiate on flights resuming or business relations or other matters like that.
Right, we're talking about Israel and the United Arab Emirates,
yes,
which was the focus of that event. So, Caitlin, let me ask you, the president has announced that the government will send up to 125 million reusable face masks to schools to help them reopen. Now, this comes despite numerous times the president says he himself would not wear a mask. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
So it's voluntary. You don't have to do it. They suggest it for a period of time, but this is voluntary. I don't think I'm going to be doing it, but you have a lot of ways you can look at it. Oh, I just don't want to wear one myself. It's a recommendation. They recommend it. Again, I would wear one if I thought it was important. I'd have no problem wearing a mask. I don't know. I'm supposed to make a speech. I just don't know. Should I speak in a mask? You're going to have to tell me if that's politically correct. I don't know. If it is, I'll speak in a mask. I had it on. I had it on backstage. But they said you didn't need it, so if I didn't need it, and by the way, if you notice, nobody else had it on that was in the group.
Well, I had one on before. I wore one in this back area, but I didn't want to give the press the pleasure of seeing it. But no, where I had it in the back area, I did put a mask on. I think it sets an example. I think it sets an example both ways, and as they say, I did have it on. Well, I'll probably have a mask if you must know. I mean, I'll probably have a mask. I think when you're in a hospital, especially in that particular setting where you're talking to a lot of soldiers and people that in some cases just got off the operating tables, I think it's a great thing to wear a mask. I've never been against masks, but I do believe they have a time and a place.
Right now, that's saying wear a mask, and that's okay with me. That's good.
Would you urge Americans to wear a mask?
If it's necessary, I would urge them to wear a mask, and I would say follow the guidelines.
Okay.
You know, so Caitlin, the shifting nature of the messaging by the White House, by the president on this subject, some people may find confusing. Can you just give us a sense of why there seems to be this kind of pendulum swing in the way in which the president has talked about this act, which public health officials are pretty much in agreement on, the majority of them, that wearing a mask does help prevent the spread of coronavirus? Why these sort of swings between different attitudes from the president on this issue?
Absolutely right, Elaine, that this has been proven to be an effective way to combat the virus at this point, or at least keep people safe. This comes as the president has been yearning to open up schools and to get schools back up and running. But there is this real anxiety among the public about whether they would feel comfortable sending their children to schools. Lots of schools are trying to figure out, do you do in person, do you do virtual, do you do a hybrid of both? For older students, it may be easier to do virtual, but for younger students, it may be a little more difficult. And it's also a little more difficult to have younger students wear masks, to keep them on their faces, to keep them social distanced. As both of you know from having kids yourselves, I think that is certainly a challenge. And so this is kind of representing the idea of what the president wants to do and what is kind of very difficult to do. He wants to open schools, and by saying that the government will support or will send masks kind of shows that they know that this is a real concern for people. And this is an issue that is a real personal one for people as well. It's become a political one, going back to school, but remember, parents, teachers, my parents are teachers, they're all making these decisions, and it's causing a lot of anxiety among the public.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Caitlin. I mean, it's a struggle to keep the shoelaces tied sometimes. So this issue of keeping a mask on really can seem daunting. I can see how that might be daunting for some parents. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tamara Keith, thank you both. Great to see you.
You're welcome.